So good evening everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for this online briefing on the proposals for phase 2 of the Kings Heath and Moseley Places for People scheme. We're running this as a Teams live event, but we've got various people here to support and answer your questions. My name is Rebecca Hawthorne. I work in the travel demand management team at Birmingham City Council, and I'm leading on the consultation for this process. And I'm just going to pass around a few others who are here. You'll be able to hear their voices and they'll introduce themselves. So I'll pass over now to Councillor Trickett.
Hiya, I'm Lisa Trickett, councillor for Brumwood and Kings Heath. I, along with the Moseley and Kings Heath Bilsey councillors, sit on a members board that is trying to oversee this process and ensure accountability. I'm here to listen and to ensure that the board is made aware of issues raised today.
Thank you. And just to say that other ward councillors have joined us as participants, so they are also listening, but you won't hear their voices. And then if we go around in the order we described.
Good evening, my name is Peter Edwards, Travel Demand Manager. So we're the team that manage all the consultations and the engagement around active travel schemes in Birmingham, as well as working with schools and workplaces, encouraging sustainable and enabling sustainable travel in the city.
Thank you, David.
Hi, I'm David Miles. I'm the lead designer from Jacobs for these schemes, and I'll be going through the schemes in detail as part of this presentation.
Thank you, Hayden.
Hello, my name's Hayden Taylor, and I'm the Jacobs project manager for Kings Heath and Moseley.
And Lucy.
Hi, I'm Lucy Ronaldson. I am a transport planner, and I am supporting with the consultations of this particular Places for People scheme.
Thank you. Lucy, can you just send the link to Mel Jones to join us, because she hasn't been able to join as a presenter. Mel Jones, our head of transport planning and network strategy, was planning to be here and hasn't been able to join. So we'll just work on the admin for that as we press on with the presentation. So the structure for this evening is that first of all, I will do a bit of presentation around kind of setting the context of the scheme and how we've got to where we are now. And then David, as he said, will talk through the phase 2 proposals in a bit more detail. And then following that, we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A session. You will find that there is a Q&A chat function. So you're very welcome to put questions in there at any time during the presentation. I'm afraid with the number of people attending, it was not practical to allow people to unmute and ask their questions verbally, but we will be trying to answer those as we go along in the chat where possible, and also putting them to the presenters as a sort of a panel session when we've done the presentation. So we hope to be able to answer your questions. If there are questions that we don't get to tonight or we haven't been able to answer, we will also be using this session to update. There's a frequently asked questions document on the consultation page, which I've already updated with various things that have emerged in the early days of the consultation, and we'll continue to update that to cover off questions. So I wanted to start by sort of saying why are we doing all this and what else are we doing? Because we're aware that we're at a point in Birmingham and nationally where there's more traffic on our roads than they were ever intended to carry, and we need to find ways to make our transport system fit for purpose going into the future. And one of the things we need to do is to reduce the traffic across the piece. And you may have heard in the media today, there's just been the early news that the Birmingham Transport Plan, the final document, is due for adoption by the Council's Cabinet next week. And that document sets out how we want our transport network to be, so that active travel, by which I mean things like walking and cycling, become the natural and easy choice for most people's short trips, and that we have an attractive, reliable public transport system that's easily available for longer journeys, meaning that people do have a real choice not to use their cars for every trip, recognising that there are still trips for which the car is the most appropriate, but that actually those are much fewer and further between than currently. So looking at the range of improvements that are planned in Kings Heath and Moseley, I wanted to highlight these because I know sometimes it can seem a little bit like the Places for People project is all that we're doing in the area, but there's actually a lot more going on that will benefit coming up. So In terms of bus journeys in the area, there's a project coming forward to put some bus lanes up in Balsall Heath, up near the up towards the Middleway. You may think, what's that got to do with Kings Heath and Moseley? Well, actually, if you're wanting to get the 50 going into town, you're looking for that journey to be reliable and quick all the way through. And if the journey into town is improved by some bus priority measures in Balsall Heath, then that's of benefit for the overall connectivity of the area. Looking a little further ahead, there's also plans to bring cross-city buses into operation. So that will be a bus that starts one side of the city, goes to the other. So, you know, I live down in Northfield. I'd be able to get on a bus in Northfield, get off in Sutton Coldfield. The reason we don't have those in the city at the moment is that the bus operators say we just can't run a reliable service because we get caught up in traffic. We need to have the ability to turn around in town to get back onto the appropriate timetable. But if we can put in more bus priority measures, that's bus lanes, that sort of thing, then it gets that journey reliability that enables us to have cross-city buses and improves connectivity across the city centre, and also means it's easier to make trips within the city centre by bus. There's also already been good news from National Express fairly recently. They've reduced quite a lot of their fares, and they've also introduced weekly fare capping. When you pay with your contactless card or your Swift card, you now don't pay more than a certain amount on your journeys, which I know I've benefited from significantly with the taking fewer journeys now, but not having a bus pass. But the contactless has been really good. People, I'm sure, will be aware that there are plans to reopen the local train stations in Moseley and Kings Heath on the Camp Hill line and to restore passenger services to those. I understand that construction on that is due to begin in 2022, with services beginning at some point in 2023. So that's something to look forward to. There are also plans to improve cycle journeys in the area, coming forward particularly as part of the same pot of money that Places for People is coming from, is a link between Moseley and the popular Ray Valley cycle route and the A38 Blue cycle route, which just makes that, you know, joining up those cycle routes, making it easier to get into town and out towards the south of the city, a real benefit for cycling. And there's also some money earmarked for cycle parking in local centres, and Kings Heath is getting its fair share of that with additional on-street cycle parking planned. In terms of Kings Heath High Street and similarly Moseley local centre, the High Street there, you'll be aware that some of the parking was on-street parking was suspended during COVID to make more space for social distancing and queuing as people were going back to local shops when they were able to. There's currently a review of how we go forward with that, whether we keep some of the on-street parking, or what was on-street parking, permanently removed, which, as I say, has the advantage for pedestrians, but the other advantage there, it can reduce congestion if you have less on-street parking, because the minute somebody stops to park, you start to get a queue of traffic behind them. And there's also, if people are looking for that scarce on-street parking, then they can actually spend more time looking for the parking, driving around, than actually if they've just gone straight to an off-street car park, getting the vehicle off the road quicker. We're working with local schools in the area on some school streets projects. We've got a couple of schools who are hopefully going to come on board with car-free school streets. That's where an area immediately outside a school is closed to traffic at the start and the end of the school day, just for about an hour at each end, other than for residents of that street who would have a permit allowing them access. So that just keeps school children a lot safer and encourages the school run to be done by more sustainable modes, because there's not cars all around the school gate, with parents feeling that it's unsafe for their children to walk, cycle, scoot to school. And finally, coming back round almost to the Places for People, we're doing an area-wide traffic study looking at the impact of the Places for People scheme, particularly on the boundary roads, so the roads where there is still quite a lot of traffic. I'll explain that in a moment, to see what the impact there has been and whether there are mitigations that we can take to improve how those streets operate. Things like amending junctions and signal timings might come into that, and various other tools that we might have in the box to try and alleviate some of that congestion, whilst acknowledging that the overall goal here is to reduce the total number of vehicles, because people are enabled to leave their car at home for a number of trips. So looking at the places for people and the principle of this, if you think of most modern housing estates now, they tend to be designed so that there's just 1 or 2 vehicle access points off a main road. So you'd find that the only cars on the estate would have business on the estate. They might be residents' cars, they might be visiting, they might be doing deliveries there. But at the same time, those estates often will have paths going off at all sides to allow access. So if you're on a walking or cycling journey, you'd be able to cut through that area. But if you're driving, you'd naturally go round, you wouldn't drive through that residential estate. So the idea of the Places for People project is to change areas that were not originally built in that way and to prevent vehicles from cutting through side streets in the same way, keeping them on the main road other than for access to properties. And as we do this, it helps to make active travel the go-to choice for those short trips, as we were mentioning on the previous slides. So things like the school run or visiting the local shops, because the streets are easier and more pleasant and they're no longer dominated by cars, people feel better able to do those without their car. It also enables communities to make great use of local spaces. I mean, the recent Kings Heath Pride event, which is the photo on the left that I've pinched from the Hare and Hounds there, was a great use of being able to, that's closed area of York Street, being able to use that for a community event. And more locally, you can see, you know, in the winter with the snow, it's been able to go out and build, you know, community snowman building. That was something that spontaneously happened that the residents did because they had the space. And on the right there, the Woodcraft folk had done a session where they'd done some kind of street art on Cambridge Road. I don't know exactly what they were doing there, but you know, they were able to do that because of the car-free environment. So it's a nice benefit to local communities. So to give a very brief recap on a high-level timeline of how we got to where we are now. Back in May 2020, the government made available some money for schemes that would benefit active travel, particularly aimed at supporting people to travel actively during and beyond COVID. The schemes were initially to be put in as temporary measures, although there was the announcement at the time that there would be a follow-up tranche 2 of the funding to enable more permanent schemes as appropriate. So later in 2020, we ran our first consultation on proposals for the project in Kings Heath and Moseley, and those schemes were delivered from September 2020. Later in 2020, from November through to March of this year, we ran a review of all the schemes that have been delivered with this emergency active travel money at the same time as bidding for our tranche 2 funding to enable those further and more permanent measures. Back in February, March, we ran a further consultation exercise coming to you to talk about issues, how the scheme was going and to explore options for phase 2. And we're now in October, and this is where we're at the stage of consultation on these phase 2 proposals. Then going forward, the scheme will be delivered that comes as a result of this consultation will be delivered in early 2022. It will be delivered, an ETRO is an experimental traffic regulation order, which is the same way that we did the phase 1 scheme. And what that means, so a traffic regulation order is the legal documentation required to make changes on the road. And an experimental traffic regulation order means that you don't have your legal consultation prior to implementation. You have it actually during the first 6 months of operation of the scheme. But you're able to make changes to the scheme as appropriate during that initial period. So that's where the experimental comes in. So if you find that you've got a measure not quite in the right place, you're able to move it much more easily than if you've done the full TRO, traffic regulation order process. The traffic ETRO can last for up to 18 months. So at that time or sooner, we would, if the scheme continues, you need to do a full traffic regulation order process. So there would be another formal statutory consultation on that. But the delivery of these measures earmarked, as I say, early 2022. So a quick reminder of the scheme that's currently in place, although I'm sure this will be familiar to many of you viewing today. We have modal filters in place, and that's the first term I'm going to use, a bit of jargon there. that I need to explain. So a modal filter is a point on a street where motorised vehicles aren't able to pass that point, but people on bikes, wheelchairs, mobility buggies, on foot, etc. can carry on through. So you've got a little picture of the one on York Road, and I have got a larger picture later in the presentation to remind you. What we've got is a couple of large planters in the road and then a bollard in the middle. And we do use lockable bollards, so a key holder can remove the bollard. So, for example, the refuse services, so the bin wagons can have the option to move through the modal filters rather than turning around when they're doing their rounds, just gives that bit of flexibility. And in phase one, we delivered a comprehensive scheme to the west of the High Street, that's the Vicarage Road side, which you can see details of there, but we'll again go through that in a bit more detail later in the presentation. And to the east side, we just put in 3 modal filters as a kind of early demonstrator project of how this might work. And what we've done now is worked up fuller proposals. It's worth noting while we're here, the 3 of the 3 modal filters, there's one on School Road and one on Cambridge Road. And in the proposals that we put forward for phase 2, those both are retained where they are. There's one currently on Poplar Road, and in both of the proposals that we put forward for phase 2, that one is removed and a different arrangement is proposed in that area. Phase 1 hasn't been all been plain sailing. There have been a lot of lessons learnt for us at the council and things that we need to take on board as we move forward into phase 2. And one of the things, as Councillor Trickett referred to, is we do have the local member board now who've really taken a steering role to make sure that we get this right going forward, and that we really do listen to the community and put together a scheme that does achieve our objectives, but that works as best we possibly can for the community. So what did we learn? We learned that delivering things quickly isn't easy, perhaps not a surprise, but the condition of the funding there, that emergency funding, meant that we really did have to turn things round with considerably less time than we would have liked. But understandably, COVID was driving things and driving the pace of things. And actually, that's something we need to take on board and bear in mind, because looking at the climate crisis, that's actually setting the pace for the delivery that we need on elements of things like the Birmingham Transport Plan. So actually, we're going to have to find a way of delivering things quickly but well, so that we can rapidly look to decarbonise our transport network. We had really high levels of engagement on this project, which was great, but we were really felt hampered by what we could do in terms of conventional consultation methods by COVID restrictions. So we had really good online engagement, but what we weren't able to do is make use of the library places like that for people to have access to the information if they weren't online. And of course, we couldn't get out and do face-to-face events in the area because we just weren't allowed to. And that meant that there was difficulty in how we did the consultation. I'm aware that that meant that there were people who felt their voices weren't heard in the same way that they should have been. So that's something that we need to learn. But we are pleased that we haven't got those same restrictions this time around, and we are able to do face-to-face drop-in events, which you're all very welcome to come along to. We also learnt that we need more direct feedback from people with disabilities. We've learnt a lot from an organisation called Transport for All, who have produced a report paving the way about the impact of schemes such as this on people with disabilities. So we've learnt from that, but we also have found that we get a lot of concern about how people with disabilities are affected, but what we need to make sure is that we are listening to the voice of those people who are actually directly affected, and not what we think or what others think is the impact. So on this time round on the consultation, we have asked specifically some additional questions of those who identify as having a disability which affects their travel, to ask specifically how they are impacted and get a better picture of the impact on them. Less interesting, perhaps, but we learnt a lot about the contract management, again to do with the short delivery times, but even within that we struggled to know precisely when things were going to be delivered, and some of our communication therefore around that wasn't as good as it should have been. We didn't always know what day a contractor was going to be putting things in, and so some of the information that we put out just wasn't right. So, you know, hold our hands up, we got some of that wrong, and that's something we need to learn, although hopefully this time there won't be a nationwide shortage of bollards as all local authorities scramble to deliver similar schemes, so we should have a smoother process this time. We also learnt that an area-wide approach does work best. Some of the issues that we have encountered in Kings Heath and some of the congestion and pinch points that we've had have been because we did a comprehensive scheme to the west, but we only did some measures to the east of the high street, and actually delivering the full scheme across an area should have a better overall distribution of traffic and a better impact and better delivery and enabling people to walk and cycle, rather than the sort of piecemeal do a few bits now and look to do more in the future. We learnt that we need to sort out our monitoring of schemes like this. We again had a problem with COVID in that there was just no way to get before traffic counts because we didn't have recent traffic counts in the area, and COVID meant that there was nothing resembling normal traffic. So, you know, to have got that before data, we needed a time machine, which we didn't have, and that's probably a lesson learnt, that we can invent a time machine. It's probably not for this project. But we need some robust monitoring there, and we've learnt that. We've done some traffic surveys back in May when we were coming out of lockdown. We've got some more coming up fairly soon, and we will look to do more again once the scheme is in and bedded in, so we can get a better picture of how that's worked. We've also got ongoing air quality monitoring, and we will keep, have ongoing engagement with the community to see how it's working for them. But I've also put in that monitoring needs to be proportionate, because you can collect all the data in the world, but actually sometimes you've got to get on and do the scheme, and you've got to say, OK, well, the value of this scheme is such that, you know, it's worth doing some good kind of spot counts on traffic, you know, a week's data here, a week's data in 6 months' time, but it would be overkill to try and monitor traffic on every road every day. That would just cost far more money than would be sensible for a scheme of this nature. So we've got a strategy in place for some robust proportionate monitoring. And finally, behaviour change does happen, but it takes time. So schemes like this can certainly enable people to change their travel behaviour. And I know anecdotally I've heard of people who have been able to give up a car, the families started to walk and cycle more, that how they take the kids to school has changed. But that wider behaviour change that we thought might be locked in from people's behaviour during COVID perhaps hasn't happened at the pace that we had hoped. And there has been a lot of people who have gone from driving a half-mile journey and are now saying, well, I'm having to drive a 2-mile journey because the changes that have been made. So we need to do more to encourage people that half-mile journey actually is ideal for switching to sustainable active travel, and making it normal and making it okay to do that. And I know that there are a lot of people in the area who do that and who are already walking and cycling regularly, but there's still more that we can do to have that to happen, and that maybe we need to learn that the traffic evaporation that we're looking for in this scheme takes longer than we think to come about. So looking at the phase 2 proposals then, what we are presenting are concept layouts. They're not a detailed design. So what it says is we might put a modal filter here, we might put a pedestrian crossing here. It doesn't say it will be 3 metres from that dropped curb and there will be 2 metres of double yellow lining. It's not that level of detail. That will follow once we've got what we think is the best design going forward. But it's important to note that this is a what, not an if consultation. So this is not a shall we continue with this project? we're going to continue with this. We still think that this is something that can be a benefit for the area if we get it right, and something that can help us to move towards that transport network, the vision that we're looking for. So the decision has been taken that we will carry on with phase 2 of this project, but the important thing now is to listen to the community and to get a scheme that works as best we possibly can for everyone in the community. So what we are putting forward, we have got 2 proposals for the west of the High Street, so the Vicarage Road side. We're putting forward option A, which is the current layout, and then option B, which is with some changes to how that side works. And similarly for the east of the High Street, we have 2 proposals, option C and option D. And within the consultation, we do say, which of these would you prefer? That gives us a sort of an indication, but more important really are the comments that you make on those proposals, because I will be very surprised if what we come out with is exactly option C or option D. It's much more likely to be something that picks elements that work together from those different proposals and comes up with the best option, and potentially has different things in it that we haven't pulled out, but that do emerge as a result of the consultation. So just before I pass over to David, a couple of 3 terms that I said I'd define so that they hopefully make sense when he's talking. Modal filter, as I described earlier, the type that we've got now. There's my bigger York Road picture. That's a filter that allows cyclists, walkers, etc. to go through, but doesn't allow motorised traffic to go through. A specific type of filter there is a bus gate, and what the bus gate does is allows also buses to go through past that point on the roads. A lovely example in dreary Scotland. They don't look to have quite such good weather there on my Google Street View, but that wouldn't have a bollard because obviously the bus needs to go through, but that would usually be enforced by camera, so there'll be number plate recognition on there, and if a bus goes through, that's fine. If an unauthorised vehicle goes through, then they'd get a penalty charge notice in the post. And finally, a diagonal filter, which is again a filter that just lets through your cyclists, pedestrians, mobility buggies, etc. But this is one that's on a crossroads, and it goes diagonally across those, effectively creating 2 separate streets for cars. This is an example down in London where the sun does shine apparently. And in these case, they've made each of those streets one way. It does depend on how much space you've got on the road there, whether you can make it one way or retain 2-way. And David will point out some examples of where different things are possible within Kings Heath. But in quite a few of ours, we put in one way because that also potentially helps with moving around with a lot of parked cars on the street. One of the advantages of a diagonal filter is that things like the bin lorries wouldn't have to unlock the bollard. They can potentially do a route that means they can do a loop. It potentially makes access easier for deliveries, for emergency services, etc. So I will pass on to David, who's actually going to show the information in a slightly different way than slides. So I think Lucy's going to switch us over.
Yeah, David, can you just share your screen and I'll put it up.
Okay, I'm sharing now.
Great.
Is that working?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. So yes, as mentioned, I will start going through option A first, which is the current scheme already in place on the west side of the High Street. And I'm going to do it side by side where I've got my map of the overall scheme here. I'm going to go through on Google Maps as well to give a more zoomed in view of where we're looking at. So starting on the north end, we have the existing modal filter on Station Road. It is located to the west of the rear access from the police station to make sure that they have access from both of their entrances to the High Street side. We then have the filter on Grange Road, and then the 2 filters on York Road, well, 2 sets of filters to create this pedestrianised area, and then the filter on Silver Street. Now together, these sets of filters prevent through traffic movements between the High Street and Avenue Road, so that only the local residents and other people who have business in this estate will be driving into the estate, and no one will be cutting through the estate unless they have the key to do so, such as refuse vehicles. The filters on York Road and Silver Street also aim to create a separation between the retail areas, or most of the retail areas, and the residential area, so that the retail is accessed from the High Street and the residential area is accessed from Avenue Road or Vicarage Road. We then also have the filter on Highbury Road to the south of Grange Road. This filter by itself doesn't prevent any through movements, because you can obviously go around on Silver Street, Balaclava Road, etc. But it does provide an element of protection for the residents on Highbury Road itself. To the south of Vicarage Road, we then have the filters on Colmore Road, Hazelhurst Road and All Saints Road. The three of these together prevent the through movements between Vicarage Road and Howard Road. And then as part of that, we also have the one-way system on the north part of All Saints Road. So for the option B on this side of the High Street, there are some elements being retained from the existing layout. So for example, we still have the modal filters on York Road to create that pedestrianised area, and the modal filter on Silver Street to again create that separation between retail and residential. However, the modal filter on Station Road is being moved as to be a diagonal filter at the junction of Station Road and York Road, so that you have the loop going round from Grange Road, York Road and Station Road for ease of access. As mentioned, because of this diagonal filter, we'll be needing to introduce a one-way system so that you have the space to go past this diagonal filter. We then also have the modal filter on Grange Road being moved to south of South Road, and an additional modal filter being introduced on South Road between Waterloo Road and Balaclava Road. And together these filters create a loop system of York Road, Waterloo Road, South Road and Grange Road, again for ease of access, that most residents will not need to perform a U-turn to access their houses in this area. The exception being South Road, where you still need to form a U-turn on the southern side. The benefit of this arrangement is also that you maintain vehicle access to the rear end of York Road for deliveries to the businesses in that area from the High Street side. The filter on Highbury Road is also being retained, and then together with the filter on South Road, it then also prevents the north-south movements through the area. The benefit of this being that in the current layouts, a lot of vehicles were using the Highbury Road junction to access the estate, because it was the first available junction to get into the estate if you're coming from the north side of the High Street, in that you would come down the High Street onto Vicarage Road and up Highbury Road to access most of this estate. But now, because of the additional modal filters, only those on Highbury Road, Silver Street and Balaclava Road will be able to do that, and other residents will need to go via Avenue Road and use the Grange Road and Station Road accesses. This will then lessen the junction movements at Highbury Road, which will then allow Vicarage Road to flow more smoothly. On the south side of Vicarage Road, the modal filters on Colmore Road and Hazelhurst Road are being moved to be directly south of Vicarage Road, and the filter on All Saints Road is being moved to north of Abbots Road. The purpose of this is to have the bulk of the vehicle accessing this area being from Howard Road instead of from Vicarage Road. This is again to lessen the strain of vehicle movements on Vicarage Road into these junctions. However, in the case of All Saints Road, it is important that access is maintained to the Sainsbury's car park from the High Street side of the area, which is why the modal filter is still to the north of Abbots Road instead of south of Vicarage Road. And a one-way system is being introduced along Hazelhurst Road to Abbots Road or All Saints Road, because this will better enable a U-turn facility to be introduced at the south end of All Saints Road, the middle of All Saints Road, north of Abbots Road. Additional pedestrian crossing facilities have also been considered, including one on Howard Road to the east of Colmore Junior School, because we are aware that this scheme will put additional trips along Howard Road, so we are keen to ensure that this route is as safe as possible especially for children accessing the Colmore Junior School, as well as one on Vicarage Road to better control the vehicles along this road and to link the two sides of the scheme together. I'll now move on to the east side of the High Street, starting in the north end by Oxford Road. So here we have this purple cell, which is controlled by the existing modal filter on School Road to the north of Green End Road. As mentioned, this is a modal filter which is being retained from the existing scheme and is being supplemented by another modal filter on Oxford Road to the west of Biddesley Lane. This additional modal filter will prevent the east to west through movements from St Mary's Row to Yardley Wood Road, as well as journeys from St Mary's Row and onto Biddesley Lane and through Kings Heath from Biddesley Lane. We then have a diagonal modal filter being introduced at the roundabout of Valentine Road and Poplar Road, which, in addition to the existing filter on Cambridge Road, which is being retained, will create two roads through here. Instead of having a junction, it'll just be a road between Valentine Road to Poplar and a road from School Road to Springfield with no interaction between those roads. There will be a one-way system introduced as part of this diagonal filter on Valentine Road and Poplar Road. There's no one won't be needed on School Road and Springfield Road due to the space available on that side of the roundabout. The one-way system will begin on Valentine Road to the south of Ashfield Road, so that residents on Ashfield Road and Ashfield Avenue will maintain two-way access from the High Street. And the one-way system on Poplar Road will only be up to Woodville Road, so that two-way access is maintained to the Asda from the High Street. A modal filter will then also be introduced on Woodville Road to the south of the health centre, so that the health centre is also accessible via the High Street, but prevents, in general, the north-south movement cutting along Woodville Road, Heathfield Road, etc., to get down to Addison Road. A modal filter was also being introduced on Ashfield Road to the west of School Road in order to prevent Ashfield Road and School Road being used to bypass the modal filter on the roundabout of Valentine Road and Poplar Road. This ensures that Valentine Road and Springfield Road can no longer be used as a bypass of the High Street, as the corridor will be filtered with no possible bypass around it. There will also be a modal filter introduced on Melton Road between Heathfield Road and Springfield Road, and a diagonal modal filter introduced on Melton Road at the junction with Institute Road. These two filters will prevent east to west movement from the High Street to Springfield Road and beyond. And then with the bus gate being introduced as well on Addison Road to complete this blue cell on my map here. We also have a filter introduced on Woodfield Road, which, similar to the existing filter on Cambridge Road, in itself will not prevent any wider scale east to west movements through the scheme, but will grant additional protection to the residents on Woodfield Road in the same manner as the one on Cambridge Road does. Moving further south, we have a modal filter on Barn Lane to the south of Addison Road to prevent Barn Lane being used as a continuation of the Springfield Road corridor, with instead drivers needing to use Brook Lane to access Wheelers Lane. And then we have two modal filters on Portman Road, one to the south of Addison Road, one to the north of Wheelers Lane, to again prevent Portman Road being used as a north-south movement between these two roads, as well as to prevent Portman Road and Northfield Road being used as a bypass around the bus gate on Addison Road. We have several potential pedestrian crossings being considered as part of the scheme, which includes several potential locations along Springfield Road and Valentine Road, in particular either side of the Billesley Lane roundabout, and one outside Kings Heath Primary School. And we're also considering a location along Billesley Lane. Billesley Lane is also being considered for traffic calming. At this stage of the design, we are not committing to what the traffic calming measures will be. They could be vertical deflections such as traffic cushions, or they could be horizontal deflection such as traffic build-outs. That will be determined at a later stage. Okay, I'm going to move on to the final option. This option shares a lot of the same DNA as option C. So, for example, we have the same modal filters on School Road and Oxford Road to create this purple area. But then we also now have a diagonal modal filter on Billesley Lane at the junction with Dyett Road. This location is one where two-way traffic can be maintained on all links around it due to the elongated nature of this crossroads, where traffic can easily continue in both directions from Billesley Lane to Greenhill Road and from the north of Billesley Lane onto Dyett Road and vice versa. With the modal filter on Oxford Road, this creates this orange cell in the northeast corner. Due to the traffic being filtered on Billesley Lane, and therefore the reduced number of traffic that will use Billesley Lane, it enables for Billesley Lane to be used as a safe cycle route, and therefore a cycle facility will be introduced along this road. We are not sure, as with the traffic calming, what form this traffic facility will take. There's something which will determine at a later stage. Going back to Valentine Road and Poplar Road, the filter is in the same location as in the previous option, but the one-way system is being reversed just to give the two options there. The way this is presented here will give a safer drop-off for the school, because you'll be driving along northbound on Valentine Road, and then the passenger side door will be adjacent to the school, whereas in the other orientation, it provides a safer place for right turners to leave the high street to get to the school on the Valentine Road junction instead of the busy Poplar Road junction. But the extent of the one-way system is the same as in option C at Woodville Road and at Ashfield Road. The modal filter, which was on Woodville Road in option C, is instead moved to Goldsmith Road. It performs the same function in either location of preventing the north-south through movements through this area. It is just a matter of preference as to where it goes in this area. We are also introducing a modal filter on Gadsby Road in this option to provide the residents of Gadsby Road with additional protection as per the ones on Woodford Road and Cambridge Road, so that it is not used as a small cut-through route between Addison Road and Springfield Road. The location of the modal filter on Barn Lane is being moved to be north of Wheelers Lane in this option. Again, this modal filter can be located anywhere along Barn Lane to fulfill the same purpose. It is just a matter of preference as to where it is located. And on Portman Road, in this option, the modal filter is being moved to Mossfield Road, west of Bagnall Road, so that there are two access points into this area depending on where you're trying to get to, either access from Wheelers Lane to access Portman Road, Bagnall Road and this loop, or from High Street to access the western part of Mossfield Road. And that covers all of the points.
Thank you, David. I will just switch to my screen share and then let Lucy put that up. Okay, that should be available, Lucy.
Should be on the screen for you now.
Good, I will trust you on that because I can't see that bit of the screen. Thank you, David. So I've just got a couple more slides before we go to our Q&A. Just a little bit, this one's a bit of a, sort of an open thoughts for the future beyond this consultation is as a community, how would you like to use the area and what else would you like to see? Because there's the proposals that we're putting forward now, there's things that we can do, there's also potential future investment as further funding streams come online. So what else would support in the area? Are you looking for community spaces, parklets, that's kind of short pedestrianised areas like York Road, more local cycle parking? Where we're putting in one-way streets would contraflow cycling. That means allowing cyclists to go both ways, where motor vehicles can only go one way. Removal of on-street parking, and thinking about walking and cycling for your local trips. Just what else would help and would enable that? And that's something you can give us comments on this consult as part of this consultation, or also a bit of a takeaway to think about for future stages. So finally, just to recap on the consultation methods, principally we're collecting people's views via the Be Heard website, which is up there. That's the easiest way to give your feedback and is helpful for us because you've typed it yourself. But we do also have paper copies of the questionnaire for those who aren't able to access online. In Kings Heath Library, there's copies of all the consultation information. There are paper consultation questionnaires and they're able to take your completed questionnaires as well, and we'll go and collect those from them. If you do have questions, they can be emailed to us at connected@birmingham.gov.uk, but I would ask that that's for questions and clarifications. If you're just wanting to give your feedback, please use the website and then that all gets put together and collated in one go. And then finally, a series of events. Obviously, this is the first of the events and this one's online. We've got an online business briefing tomorrow, supported by the Kings Heath Business Improvement District. And then we've got 4 drop-in face-to-face events in the community, which people are welcome to just turn up at those. The only restriction we will have on those is if we do get very high numbers and we need to keep a bit of distance for COVID, that will be the only restriction on numbers in those. So people are very welcome to come along to those and join us. And then we are at that point where Lucy has the unenviable task of looking at the questions that you've been putting in the Q&A in the chat and posing some of those to us as a panel for picking up for response.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, we've as you can probably see, we've received over 150 questions, so we're not going to have time to go through them all. But if there are any sort of pressing questions, then we can pick those up if you email them to us at connected@birmingham.gov.uk. So I think just a few that are sort of picked up on. So firstly, are there any plans in motion for installing cycle lanes on the main sort of boundary roads in Kings Heath?
Yep, shall I go for that one? So we have, the City Council has a walking and cycling strategy, which includes within it a document known as the Local Walking and Cycling Improvement Plan, which sets out all the places that we are looking to put cycle links. So in some cases there will be routes that cross this area or are on boundary routes potentially, but as part of this the only place we're looking at specific potential cycle infrastructure is Bilsley Lane, but never say never. And as I mentioned, there's that link across to Moseley coming in as well.
Okay, great. Next one. So what is the council doing to make sure that buses won't be caught up in extra traffic that has been moved from the LTN streets onto bus routes, particularly around the boundaries of sort of the eastern side of the high street?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it is a difficult one because at the moment we don't have many bus priority measures in the Kings Heath area, so there will be issues with the buses getting caught in that congestion. Longer term, we might look at bus lanes, but it's not part of this proposal. But we have got the bus gate on Addison Road, which will mean that the 11 that's going through there has a clear run through that section of Addison Road. But I appreciate that doesn't help for things like the 35 getting caught on Vicarage Road. Overall, we are looking at what we can do there and how we can improve the flow through junctions, etc. But at the moment there, we haven't got the space to put in bus priority, so the bus will at that stage be in the same traffic as the cars. Don't know whether anybody's got anything they want to add on that.
Just on so Peter Edwards here, just on the fact that there are improvements to further down on the 50 route to improve reliability and the cross city bus. So those are coming. They will improve reliability for bus services, because the main thing that slows buses down is private vehicles. So yeah, we're looking at that, and we work very closely with Transport for West Midlands and the bus operators looking at that. The other thing is the scheme that removed the parking bays on Kings Heath High Street. Was partly to help traffic flow along the high street, because all those people turning in and out of those bays, kind of near Asda, near NatWest, etc., were slowing traffic flow.
Yeah, and the area-wide study will look as well at whether there's any on-street parking that's causing particular issues of congestion.
Okay, excellent. Probably this is probably for David. So we're talking about option D here. Is one access point for the whole of the green area really reasonable? Brook Lane is particularly narrow, and there appears to be no way in or out should there be an incident or need for roadworks.
There is one access point, which is via Brook Lane, because only residents of the area will need to access at that point. There should not be an issue because there'll be no through traffic using that route. In the case of an accident, the bollards, as mentioned, are lockable, so they can be removed to allow access via a different route in the case of an accident.
Okay, thank you, David. Rebecca, how can we be ensured that feedback from the suggested means are being looked at? There are many local petitions that seem to reflect a different side to what council feedback suggests. How can we trust that you're reporting these stats accurately?
We are reporting these stats accurately. We'll publish a consultation report as a result of this. I am aware there are various local petitions. I think with this scheme and some of these issues, we have found that there's quite polarised views on it, which do mean that there's very strong feelings on both people who are in favour of the scheme and sort of want it to happen and to see the benefits, and also people who are really struggling with the scheme, who are saying we're not seeing the benefits, we're only seeing disbenefits, and please take it away. And actually there is a real mix of views, and we do find things like social media tend to not act in our favour, in that we do get a bit of the echo chamber effect. So there's the conversations there are quite one-sided, one or the other, depending on the group that you're in or you're discussing in. But I can assure you that we do publish the results as accurate as people have responded. If we find that we need to explain the results, sometimes sort of saying, well, actually, in the commonplace consultations that we did before, people could respond multiple times, so it was responses rather than respondents. In the case of Be Heard, the intention is that people do just respond once via Be Heard and give their views in that one hit, but we will also be able to keep an eye on if we think we're getting multiple responses from one person looking at things like IP addresses. But what I can say is that we report what is said to us, put that back and report that.
Okay, fabulous. Is there any success criteria from phase 1? So I think this sort of comes back to the sort of monitoring of the phase 1 and going forward into sort of phase 2.
Yes, so that's something that the member board have been looking at. So Councillor Trickett may like to add something here or may not. And the board has put together a paper on what the success factors will be for this scheme and how we will measure the various things there. I have here's one I prepared earlier, department. Actually, what's up with me? There we go. So this is directly lifted from that paper on success factors. So the 5 areas that we're looking at then are traffic data, change in mode use, air quality, public perception, impact on business. And there's information there on the indicators and how those can be measured with the ongoing monitoring. So, that's in that paper, but I can leave that up while we continue with the next question if you want.
Okay, great. Once the scheme's been implemented, will there be an effort to update Google Maps and other navigation sites so that visitors and deliveries can reliably be informed of what roads are open?
Yeah, absolutely. This was somewhere where we did actually bang our heads against a brick wall a little bit in struggling to get updates on Google. So we submitted to Google and said, you know, we've made these changes. Can you update? And it did take quite a long time for those changes to go through. I think what Google was struggling with were these are temporary closures, and they weren't sure whether to mark them as temporary or make them impermanent changes. We're hoping that as we go forward with more permanent measures, we will have more response from Google on making those changes. But ultimately, we can't make the changes ourselves, but we are making an effort to try and contact those where we have got contacts. So within Google and within other sat-nav companies, we're doing our best, but it's not directly within our control.
It's not, and there is also the option to for users to report. So users can report that this is no longer a through route, and I would imagine a combination of Birmingham City Council and users will encourage it to happen quicker. But as Rebecca says, there's not a kind of switch on and off, unfortunately. So as we saw with phase 1, it will take people who use those systems some time to understand that they can no longer go that way. But so there may be some short-term disruption around that, but it should be short-term while those systems update and they learn themselves that they can no longer, the route that they're used to is no longer a through route.
Okay. Let's find another one. So how do you intend to engage with people who are not online? How can they sort of send feedback to you?
Yep. So principally, there's 2 questions really within that. Is that how are people who are not online going to know about the consultation, and how can they feedback their views? So in terms of telling people about the consultation within the scheme area, we have done a leaflet drop delivering leaflets to properties. For people who are coming from further afield, you could, you know, where do you draw the boundary on delivering leaflets? Because actually, as people have rightly pointed out, people are affected from quite a wide area. So in addition to the leaflet drop, we've got roadside signage, some kind of big yellow A-frame signs that drivers should see. We've also had some posters put up on lampposts for pedestrians, public transport users, etc., to see that the consultation is taking place. In terms of giving feedback, then we've got Kings Heath Library as hosting the offline consultation for us. So anytime during those opening hours, they've put a little display out for us, which is very nice. And as I say, we'll go in and collect those questionnaires that come back by that method. And of course, people are welcome at the face-to-face events that we're holding in the area. People can come along to those without restriction.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Question probably again for maybe David. So why hasn't a one-way system been considered rather than complete blockage approach? Surely that will reduce traffic but allow free movement for residents.
It will only prevent traffic in one direction as per what a one-way street does, so that you still have that through movement in one of the directions. So it will not fulfill the criteria which we're looking to achieve in this scheme. Yes, it would allow for more free movement of residents, but it won't create the areas we're looking to create.
It's worth noting, though, that where we put in diagonal filters, we have got something more akin to one-way systems, but not those one-way through routes, which, as David said, wouldn't achieve the objectives, but more one-way loops.
Okay. Thanks. I'm just trying to keep my questions keep moving around. Right. Let's find another one. Sorry. So can you elaborate on how cycling on Billesley Lane fits in with the city-wide thinking? It appears to be a route from nowhere special to nowhere special.
Peter, do you want the opportunity to come in on that one?
Well, I think it connects from kind of Billesley through to Moseley and then through to kind of Wake Green Road, Spark Hill. So I wouldn't say it was two routes to nowhere. That is one of two options, of course. The other being that the idea being that with these filtered streets, that cycling through the LTN itself offers an attractive option, and you don't necessarily want to or need to cycle down the main roads because the other roads have been filtered and are more pleasant, quieter, so offer a more attractive place to cycle. So I wouldn't say it offers a route to nowhere. I haven't got the local cycling walking map in front of me to see if it forms part of that network, but it certainly connects areas across, but it's one of two options.
To jump in on that point, part of the local cycling walking infrastructure plan does include Oxford Road, so the cycle route along Billesley Lane would link to that route.
Mm-hmm. And I think I noticed a question, I think in my skimming of the questions about the route that I mentioned from Moseley linking up to the A38 and the Ray Valley route, and why is it linking to Moseley and not Kings Heath? But the advantage of being adjacent to the Places for People scheme is you're then linking into those quieter streets that we've created, where you don't necessarily need specific cycle infrastructure to get through that last bit into Kings Heath. So it does join up with Kings Heath.
Okay, great. Another question then. So has the council considered smart filters for resident-only traffic? So the example given here is one in London, where instead of a bollard, there's a sign that says no entry except for residents, with a number plate recognition camera to check that. Yeah. At the moment, in terms of what we as a local authority can do and can enforce by way of moving traffic offences, we can't do that. The legislation is slightly different in London. We've had a similar issue around our car-free school streets, where when the road is closed to motor vehicles and we allow residents, we've had to do it by permit that each resident has to be able to go through the closure point, and we've been able to do that because the schools themselves marshal the schemes and are able to check that the vehicles have permits. In a scheme like this that's running 24/7, a permit system wouldn't work, and as I say, we don't have the legal powers to enforce by camera. So we would love to, but unfortunately we can't at the moment. We will continue to talk to the DFT about changes to legislation nationally, but at this moment it's not something that's available to us in the same way that it is for bus. So we can do it for buses, as they were able to enforce that, but we can't.
Just to add to that, on the flip side, not just the legality around it, but what we're trying to do here is to influence and change behaviour, and not just of people who may be driving through the study area, but also the people that live within that area. So if by allowing residents to go through the filters, you're not encouraging that modal filter, you're not encouraging that behaviour change, they're unlikely to change their behaviour. The other side of it would be that, would you feel as safe cycling down that road without a physical impediment behind you, knowing that a bollard is there? You feel safe. You may be more likely to cycle with younger people. Older people might be more willing to. You are not so safe in an ANPR situation because somebody might just drive through and think, I don't care about the fine, or just not notice the sign. and therefore is the scheme that you've created, is it as safe as something that has a physical barrier? Of course we would prefer not to have a physical barrier, but we saw with phase 1 that motorists were going through when we just had a planter either side but no and signage but no bollard in the middle, so that's not an option, unfortunately, and the bollard is required to make it safe.
Thanks, Peter. I think so. This question in sort of different forms has come up a few times. So how can driving for a longer distance to the local shops help to reduce emissions and pollution?
I'm going to let Peter first go on that one as well.
The whole concept of the scheme is that we want people to think about those journeys, and is the car the best method of doing that journey? Of course, for some journeys, it may well be you may have a family of 5 and you may need to buy more shopping than you can carry on your back or in bags or on a bicycle or on a cargo bike or any other form of transport. But by making these shorter journeys, and I think one of the first questions was a journey that was 1 mile and was now going to become 3 miles, can those journeys be changed? And the statistic that always sticks out to me, which is part of our Birmingham transport plan that's referred to earlier, is that 25% of journeys in this city, vehicle journeys, are 1 mile or less, and these are the journeys we need to impact. So some journeys may become longer. That's kind of the point of the scheme, but the idea is that by making it less convenient and for making you think about it, then you may decide to change that journey. Those journeys that you cannot change may take a bit longer, but the idea is the modal shift and the behaviour change. But you have to acknowledge that some journeys will take long. But I think there's been a lot of questions, and I've been trying to answer them down the side. All properties, all businesses, all medical centres, anywhere is still accessible by a motor vehicle. You just can't drive from one side through to the other, and I think that needs to be made really clear. So Poplar Road Medical Centre can absolutely still be accessed in a motor vehicle, as can Asda, as can Lidl, and any other questions that pop up.
Okay, thanks, Peter. One maybe for David here. So I was wondering what was the thinking behind removing the Poplar Road bollard and creating a one-way system past the school?
The purpose behind removing it was mostly to focus on removing the trips instead along the Valentine Road, Springfield Road corridor, and by putting in that diagonal filter on the roundabout of Valentine Road and Poplar Road. And then introducing that diagonal filter necessitated the removal of the modal filter on Poplar Road.
I think it's also worth noting Kings Heath Primary had been in touch with us and said they were having issues this term with coach drop off and pick up for the children because of the school being there on the corner, and actually this would help because coaches will be able to access via one of Valentine and exit and Poplar and exit via the other. So that we hope will be a solution that works for the school.
Okay, right, let's find another question. Sorry, they're coming in thick and fast, which is great. Keep them coming in, but are there any plans to calm traffic on Tenbury Road, Featherstone Road and Livingston Roads? These roads are also being used as wrap runs to avoid traffic on Vicarage Road, Howard Road and Ulster Road.
Yeah, and I've got some correspondence in my inbox, I think, about Tenbury Road specifically asking about measures there. Where schemes are outside of, where roads are outside of the scheme, we don't currently have any plans, but we'll be talking to our colleagues in local engineering about kind of routine requests for traffic calming, and also part of the area-wide study will look at the impact on some other local roads. Something else I think that's come up and is sort of related here is is around modelling of the scheme. So we can do traffic modelling, which before we put in a scheme, we plug in what the scheme is going to look like, and the model gives us an estimate of what will change, where traffic will go if it's rerouting, whether there will be less traffic, you know, as trips are changed. It's not a perfect answer, you know, it's not a real world a test of how it will work, but it gives us an indication. And I know a few people have asked, have we done modelling to see the impact on these other local roads, such as sort of Tenbury Road and round on, I think Cold Bar comes up a fair few times in queries as well. We haven't done that modelling yet. We will do that modelling prior to implementation. The reason we haven't done it yet is just that we've got a lot of scenarios here with A, B, C, D, and with knowing that actually probably what we will come out with is some sort of hybrid, and it will be informed by your feedback here. So we will undertake that modelling once we've got what we think is the final design, and we will do that modelling. We will have comparative models for as it is now, so with effectively option A and the few measures to the west, for the scheme as designed, and for if all the current places for people measures were not in there, so all modal filters that we put in over the last year and a bit were removed, to see what the different impacts would be there. So that also will be part of enabling us to see where there are issues on other local roads, and whether there's anything that can be done.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Another one, well, another couple here really, similar things. So particularly in London, Ealing's given as one example, have sort of backtracked on their low traffic neighbourhoods, and they've been sort of removed. Why then are Birmingham sort of going ahead and doing it anyway?
I'm happy to take that one. Whilst Ealing and some other local boroughs may have taken out their schemes, London has implemented, I think, 80 low traffic neighbourhoods. The majority are staying in. It's part of their policy. Central government is encouraging this. We are in a climate emergency at the moment. We cannot carry on as we are with, as I'll go back again, with 25% of vehicle journeys in this city being a mile. I used to work in the clean air zone team. 900 deaths a year in this city are due to poor air quality in the city. We cannot simply sit around and do nothing. You may not agree that this is the best way to do it, but this is working to change behaviour in other areas. This has been done in Western Europe, in Holland, in Denmark for a long period of time. The government has said that that local authorities that remove these schemes before they have time to settle in, as Rebecca said at the start of her presentation, we hope to see a behaviour change and to see modal shift of people away from their private motor vehicles. It may not have happened as quickly as we would have liked, perhaps due to the impact of people being less trusting of public transport. But the government has said that local authorities that remove this infrastructure, cycle lane, whether it be cycle lanes, low traffic neighbourhoods, that encourages more sustainable travel, will not be considered for further funding rounds. So Ealing and the London Borough of Kensington, for example, which ripped out a very popular cycle lane, they will have less opportunity to access funding to give more opportunity for people to walk and cycle. And Birmingham City Council does not want that to happen. We have our transport plan. One of the key visions of that transport plan is to make our neighbourhoods more attractive for people walking and cycling. It's signed off in policy, as is the reallocation of road space away from private motor vehicles. So this is written into Birmingham City Council policy, and is something that we will continue to do.
Thanks, Peter. So this next one is slightly more of a statement than a question. Just somebody saying that they're unhappy with the tone of the presentation, and there's a lack of detail within the plans. How, in terms of how can they make a decision about which option when there isn't clear details, for example, sort of traffic calming on Billesley Lane? and the cycle infrastructure.
So I think we can give some potential examples of what would be the traffic calming. I'm not a traffic engineer. I may defer to colleagues from Jacobs there, but just if we could have some examples of what could be done.
So I think that was, yeah.
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, David. Sorry, David. Yeah, that was me handing over to you just purely for some examples of what potentially could be done to help this person make their consultation response.
Yeah. So to begin with, the reason why we're keeping it vague is purely because we don't know the details ourselves yet. And when we say traffic calming along Biddesley Lane, we didn't want to get into the details of we're putting this specific measure outside this specific house, because then they'll open up more issues in this consultation than we're prepared to deal with at this stage. It's just getting through the initial concept of what we might do. But that being said, there are examples we could put in as traffic calming. So the three types I generally refer to are vertical deflection. I'll explain this in a minute. Vertical deflection, horizontal deflection, and and psychological measures. So your vertical deflection would be speed cushions or speed humps, where a vehicle is forced to slow down because they're hitting a vertical deflection and it'll be dangerous to go over it at speed. It's the most commonly used type of traffic calming. There are already some speed cushions along Biddesley Lane. So this will, if we go with this route, it will simply be an extension of the existing scheme. The horizontal deflection is something like a chicane, where one lane of the carriageway is built out with a curb build out, so that only one direction can travel past that point at a time. There'll be there'll be a bypass of cyclists to get through this build out without the need to go out into the middle of the carriageway. And then there'll simply be a series of chicanes along the road where vehicles must give way to one another, alternating directions to control vehicles that way. And then the psychological measures would be no physical infrastructure along the road at all, but it's things like painted road markings, which give the indication that the road is narrowing, or there's something called dragon's teeth, which are triangles painted on the road at steadily decreasing intervals, which give the indication that you're speeding up when you're naturally not. Some examples are psychological measures.
Thanks, David. Sorry, Rebecca, are you going to?
That's all right. No, I think the other thing, which is again sort of adjacent to that in terms of the detail and things that people feel that they need to know to make their response. I think it's a case of where we've got things like modal filters and planters are going to go in. I think it's looking at the kind of the network and how that would work. So, you know, where you know, look at how you're going to access your property and how it's going to affect you, and is that does that work for you? In terms of then when we get to that point where we are saying, you know, this is exactly here on the road. Whilst we won't have another full round of consultation, I have already flagged and identified that there's going to be little bits of localised engagement that we need to do. If there's going to be a modal filter very close to your property and you've got a dropped curb for off-street parking, for instance, there were some on just on, I think it's Mossfield Road, just the one just off Springfield Road. I noticed this as an example, and those particular properties we might need to come back and say, okay, this is going in, and let's have a look at the detail of how that really does affect you outside your front door. Whereas for most people in the area, it's about the network and the principles of where the traffic is able to go and isn't able to go.
Thanks, Rebecca. So question here, which I guess is quite sort of quite relevant at the moment with everything sort of going on in the news. Obviously, the council are encouraging people to sort of walk and cycle sort of small shorter journeys, but in terms of sort of, for some people, personal security might feel a bit of an issue, and obviously what's happened recently is the council doing anything to sort of improve whether it's street lighting or whatever it is, to sort of make people, particularly women probably, feel more comfortable to undertake these short journeys?
I don't think lighting would necessarily be looked at as part of this proposal, but I think there has been some research that was published in the last 6 months about kind of safety within low traffic neighbourhoods, and most of this research has been conducted in London around safety, in terms of there are more people walking on the streets, more people making observations. There is this counter argument that you're safer when there's lots of cars going past, but personally, from my perspective, and I'm not a woman, and I don't want to make any assumptions, but personally I would feel safer if there's lots of people walking around on the streets, so that if anything happened to me I could shout to them rather than a car going past at 30 miles per hour, which is probably unable to help me. So there is research to show that road safety has improved within low traffic neighbourhoods, and crime has gone down as well in low traffic neighbourhoods in London. This is obviously early stages, because all of them except for Walthamstow are early. This is a new concept, as I said earlier, in Great Britain, so I will try and, while we're on the call, I'll try and dig out that research and put it into the chat somewhere. But yeah, to go back to the original point about we're not necessarily looking at lighting and measures like that. But if there are particular places where it's very dark, or people have particular concerns, then I would suggest to flag it in your consultation response, or to email us, and we can perhaps flag it up with the necessary kind of street scene teams. So if you email connected@birmingham.gov.uk.
Thanks, Peter. Got 10 minutes left, so still time for a few more questions. Will there be any sort of mitigation measures for some of the boundary roads that are negatively impacted by this scheme? So, for example, Avenue Road.
Yeah, that's one where the area-wide traffic study that I mentioned earlier that's been commissioned, that's one of the key purposes of that study, is to identify what can be done in mitigating measures on those boundary roads. You'll also notice part of the consultation that there are within that we've put in places where we might put in pedestrian crossings, and that's actually with schemes like this can be a really crucial point, is to link up the different areas with good quality pedestrian crossings for crossing those boundary roads. So do have a look at where there are suggestions that crossing facilities might be put in. Again, we haven't specified what those might be. We have available things like we could do zebra crossings, we can do signalised crossings, we can do something as simple as a dropped curb, or potentially have a small refuge in the middle of so a kind of an island in the middle of the road, so that pedestrians only have to cross half at each time. But yeah, in terms of the traffic on those roads, that area-wide traffic study is all about that, all about us seeing what mitigating measures can be put in. But if you've got suggestions, then please do include that in your consultation response. That's something that you may know, may have suggestions as well that we can include in there.
Thanks, Rebecca. Question here, which probably again yourself, Rebecca. How are we going to encourage secondary school children to walk, cycle, or use public transport to get to school? Obviously, starting habits at a young age is more likely to be carried on into adulthood.
Yeah, you've named me, but I'm going to let Peter do this one because it's the other half of our team and he's in charge of that.
Yeah, I can take that one. So the question, sorry, I was.
It's secondary school children, particularly travelling.
Secondary school, getting to secondary school. Yes, of course. Thank you. So part of what our team does, the travel demand management team does, is we engage with schools and workplaces to help them write travel plans and to better understand how it is that people travel to their establishments, why it is they travel that way, and how they can potentially help them travel in a more sustainable way. So I have two schools officers within my team who are engaged in different levels of success. It has to be said, with secondary schools, they're not as easy to engage with as primary and secondary schools, but that is their role. That is what we do as a team. Part of what we do as a team is to engage. We're seeing anecdotally more secondary age children being dropped off at school, we think, and because of COVID, and this is through conversations with schools and experience of officers and speaking to parents, etc. We think that more secondary age children are being dropped off at school because parents have concerns about public transport. So what we may be seeing is an increase in that. That, as I say, is anecdotal, but we would hope that as hopefully we start to come out of lockdowns and more people are vaccinated and people's perceptions of public transport change and return to public transport, that we would start to see people that trend to be reversed. But also, of course, by implementing a low traffic neighbourhood, if you live, I don't know, if you live on School Road and you need to get to Queensbridge School, your route to school to cycle or to walk will potentially be made far safer, and your parent may be more likely to allow you to walk or cycle to that school. That's a very specific example that I've just used there, but the whole idea is to make walking and cycling more attractive. But we know that we also need to engage with those trip generators, so the schools and the workplaces as well.
Yeah. I think, I mean, Peter's picked up at Queensbridge at the north of the area. I'm aware also that one of the issues around the Camp Hill schools is that they do have quite a wide catchment area. So again, I think there are a lot of kids there who might transition to public transport but have been dropped off early. And there's also Transport for West Midlands also do some focus on sort of transition training, what it's called. So when kids are going from year 6 into year 7, working with those children and saying, right, how are you going to get to your new school, and learning about catching the bus, those kind of life skills. And I think we're struggling at the moment because there's a cohort of children who haven't been in school at the point at which that might have happened. So we need to do some catch-up work for those children that have missed out on that opportunity for some of that resource to come in at that appropriate age.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Maybe 2 more, Lucy?
I was going to say, yeah, 2 more is what I was thinking. So a couple that have come up here. So why hasn't sort of these public transport improvements and the reopening of Kings Heath station been done in advance of these measures going in? Why is it that always the stick before the carrot?
Sorry, I was on mute. Sorry. The short, and apologies if you think it's blunt, is because the carrot has car ownership and car usage nationally in Birmingham is going up. Transport is the sector where carbon emissions continue to go up, not down. We've built our cities, not just Birmingham, but we've built our cities around private vehicle usage. It's not sustainable, as I said in my early point, so I don't need to reiterate that. The carrot has unfortunately not worked. Public transport buses have a reputation for being unreliable because they sit in traffic behind single occupancy motor vehicles. We've seen chronic underinvestment in public transport. That is now beginning to change. We're seeing more investment in public transport and in active travel through the Active Travel Fund. But you can't fix these issues that have basically been built into our infrastructure in our cities for decades overnight. So we've tried that, and we will continue to do that. That is what my team does, is the softer stuff, the travel planning, the engagement. But eventually you need to start reallocating road space and making other options more attractive than private motor vehicles, and that's what we're doing. So a combination of carrot and stick will continue, but we need, like the clean air zone and like bus gates where you're fined if you drive through. If we don't have that enforcement, people won't respect it. So unfortunately, some stick is required. We're in a climate emergency. I keep saying it. We're in a climate emergency here, and just to carry on as we are is not an option. So carrot and stick is required, and unfortunately quite a lot of stick.
Thanks, Peter. So final question. So is the council going to be agile enough to unlock the bollards in a reasonable time frame in the event of roadworks, an emergency, etc.?
There's two questions there. There's planned and there's unplanned. So roadworks and things like that. Then yes, we've got plenty of time to plan there, and that's something that we can do then as council officers. In the event of an emergency, emergency services will have the option to unlock. So the police can unlock them and redirect people, and the fire service can do that. So that's going to be more down to them for an emergency response. But there is always what's called, I think it's, I'm going to probably get this wrong, but there is a sort of a gold command looking after the roads at all hours. So if things are needed to be done in emergency, there is always somebody on call within kind of the traffic management system who can respond and can get things changed and can work with our contractors. I apologise, I don't understand how that works in detail, but I know that there is a 24-hour way of responding to emergency traffic management that needs to be done. I'm now wishing that Mel Jones, who's the head of transport planning and network strategy, had been able to join us as a presenter and not just as she's listening as a participant, because she knows how that works. But yeah, we are able to respond to those things as needed. So I'm going to come call us to a close now because we have hit our time. I want to thank everyone for coming along. We've got a lot of people. There've been, I can see there are like about 350 questions have come in through the Q&A. I apologise we haven't got to every question. We will go away and have a look at all those questions that have come in, and if there are issues that haven't been covered here, then we will go and look and update, as I say, update our frequently asked questions document. And you can, as others have mentioned, email Birmingham Connected to, if you do have questions that you feel need a direct answer and we haven't responded, best to come back on those. But thank you for your time tonight, and thank you for bearing with us. I know that this is a scheme that's been really difficult in the area. I know there's a lot of strength of feeling, and I know that there are people who don't feel we're listening. I promise we are listening. We as officers are here listening now. Your ward councillors are listening and have been viewing your questions, and you're welcome to come along to the drop-in events as well. We are listening to what you say. That doesn't mean we can do everything. That doesn't mean we can make it something that is the exact scheme that everybody wants, or the exact non-scheme that everybody wants, but we are taking on board that feedback. We love working in areas like this where we get high levels of engagement and people really do care and are passionate about their area. And I'm just going to give the floor to Councillor Trickett to just a few closing remarks, just to bring us to a close this evening. So thank you, Councillor Trickett.
Okay. Thank you, firstly, to all the residents who have turned up tonight. I think at one point we had approaching 130 residents participating, which is really fantastic. Can I also thank Rebecca and David for the clarity of their presentations, which certainly helped me understand a little more about what's going on, and also for the honesty of your answers. Sometimes answers aren't welcome, and I include you in that, Peter. Not that I'm not welcoming your answers, but it's not always giving the information people want. But it is really important we're honest with each other. You know, we're very clear. There's been mistakes made on the first rollout. There are lessons to learn. We're equally clear that doing nothing is not an option. We have got a climate emergency. We have got to reduce short journeys. We have got to take cars off the road. And again, there's whole moves to reduce the movement of cars across the city centre that are, I think, reported in The Guardian today. And what we do want to do very much within this is actually ensure that fact of safe routes to school, safe routes for the community. We can't answer everything tonight. We are listening, we are taking the notes. I do suggest dropping in to the different drop-ins where you can have more chance to look at the plans closely. I know I need to actually look at a map and follow it with my finger. So I do urge you to come to the drop-ins, and we will pick up with all of the points that everyone has raised tonight. And again, what I do ask, the debate is going to be difficult because we are having to reconcile some very conflicting views. It's really important we keep it respectful and each listen to the other, and hopefully we can find some way through. But again, thank you everyone, and I look forward to catching up with some of you at the first drop-in on York Road. Thank you everyone.
Thank you.